Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What can youth do to help combat climate change, to overcome poverty, and to empower women? What's the United Nations Envoy on Youth doing to mobilize youth around the world? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're going to take a look at youth and what role they can play not only tomorrow but also today in dealing with many of the major issues that are affecting literally billions of people around the world. My guest today is an expert on working with youth. My guest today is Ahmad Alhendawi. Mr. Ahmad Alhendawi of Jordan is the first ever United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, assuming this office in February of 2013. Mr. Alhendawi previously worked as a youth policy advisor in the League of Arab States in Cairo. Ahmad Alhendawi, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Val. Great to be with you. Thank you very much.
Second time. I appreciate you.
Second time, exactly. I'm almost documenting the progress with you because the first time was immediately after my appointment.
That's
great
right.
To be back here.
That's right. And a lot has been accomplished in the interim. Yes. Well, let's start off with a very basic question. What is your role as the envoy, the Secretary General's envoy on youth at the United Nations? What exactly do you do?
Well, I'm glad that I could answer this question for the second time because I remember for the first time when I answered this question immediately after my appointment, I was coming with certain assumptions and expectations for the challenge we are facing as United Nations and working youth issues and responding to youth needs. Now, after 3 years, of course, I have slightly different answers, so I'm glad that I have the opportunity to revisit the first and to share with you what I think is the role of the envoy on youth at the United Nations. First, to start with, we have today the largest generation of young people in the history. Half of the world's population under 25 years of age. Almost 87% of young people are coming from developing countries. Countries are working hard trying to develop their economies and to cater for their youth. And in that spirit, the United Nations immediately after the youth protest and the Arab Spring, the high youth unemployment rate in 2011-2012, realized that it's time to sharpen our focus on youth issues. That's why the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, decided that it's time for having a different way of working in youth issues. Was appointed as his envoy on youth and to help consolidate and sharpen the UN focus on youth issues. We have a big UN system, close to 40 agencies, funds, programs, and they all work in youth issues in some capacity. And my job is to connect these dots and to help make sure that we deliver more to young people, we explain our work to youth and make it more accessible, the United Nations, and increase participation avenues for young people. Exactly like we do on this show by explaining the work of the United Nations and other processes to people around the world. My job also is making sure that we explain the United Nations and help youth around the world interact with the UN, but also encourage member states and governments to add more resources and funding and work for young people. This is the biggest asset the world has today. The fact that you have this many young people around the world, and our job at the United Nations is to offer a platform to bring people together to discuss how we can best respond and invest in this massive generation of young people.
Exactly, and there are hundreds of millions of young people out there who have tremendous resources and they have an interest in helping to overcome many of these problems. Well, if we think back, last year, September of last year at the United Nations, the General Assembly, the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted. 17 logical goals that are measurable to deal with many of the problems that we were talking about earlier, such as eliminating poverty, eliminating hunger, overcoming climate change, to empower women. What specific examples do you have as far as how you've helped to bring youth into looking at these 17 Sustainable Development Goals and developing programs, projects, whatever the case might be, to deal with these and to really lend a hand today and not wait until tomorrow when they're adults or leaders in another profession?
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals, we call them the SDGs or the global goals. As you rightly said, 17 goals that are about to transform the world if we deliver them, from reversing climate change to ensuring eradicating extreme poverty and ensuring gender equality, renewable energy, jobs for young people, and many other goals. These goals, they came about by a long consultations with young people and with youth around the world. And My World survey, we consulted over 7 million young people, and they shared their views about the priorities they think are important for achieving the world we want, as we call it. And young people participated actively in setting this agenda, and member states listened to their calls and to their views. And after lengthy negotiations, we arrived to 17 goals. Now, if I tell anyone that the world is going to eradicate extreme poverty in 15 years, ensure gender equality, reverse climate change, jobs for all, and ensure that we fight hunger and we have zero hunger, somebody will say, come on, I mean, calm down. This is too much to be achieved in 15 years. But these are not my thoughts. These are not my goals. This is basically the goals of the entire world. All the world leaders, they came to the United Nations last September and they signed for achieving these goals in 15 years. So there are no excuses whatsoever for thinking or being less ambitious in the way we carry development work around the world. This is the goal. This is what we need to achieve in 15 years. And in order to achieve these goals, we need to get young people on board. Let me give you one example. In India, 800 million people under 35 years of age. 800 million. When we look to the world today, as I said, 87% of young people are coming from developing countries, countries that they need urgently to achieve these sustainable development goals. So we cannot achieve these goals without ensuring that young people are on board. At the United Nations, we always use the term leaving no one behind. And historically, we meant by that leaving no one behind means we should reach out to everyone and we should leave no one behind. But when you look to the demographic of the world today, leaving no one behind is about ensuring that nobody is left behind of being part of the solution and being part of delivering this agenda. That's where young people come forward as innovators, as contributors, and as a critical mass that is going to carry this agenda forward. Now, that's why the United Nations has to open up. Governments, they have to open up for young people and to engage them in decision-making processes, not as beneficiaries, because you cannot cater for 800 million people in one country, but rather as partners and people who are going to partner with you in delivering these ambitious goals. So I'm happy and confident to say that we have covered youth issues within the 17 goals. And in fact, there's no one goal in the 17 that is a youth goal. But if you look to all the goals, you will find the invisible goal and thread going through the 17 goals, tackling youth-related targets and development needs. So I think we're on good track, and young people are subscribing to this package, but we need more. We need to create a global youth movement.
I certainly do, no doubt about that. One, I think most people are in agreement, a large number of people anyway, are in agreement that climate change is our #1 problem around the world. What can we do to help mobilize young people to get them involved in combating climate change and to really deal with this problem, because it appears to be getting worse? You mentioned India. I think you mentioned 800 million under 35 or something like that. And of course they have a total population of 1.2 billion. That's a huge number. But they're also in India, just as many countries, every country is being adversely affected. But India is undergoing a drought in a large part of the country. You've got water scarcity problems. Food production is being limited in certain areas because of the changing climate. But what can be done to bring the youth in? Are the projects that we can get them involved in? Do you have educational programs, workshops, information that you can get to them? How do we do that?
We do it in many ways. I'm happy to say that young people are already doing part of that, but we need to get more on board. Here in New York City, for example, hundreds of thousands of young people to the street marching and protesting and asking world leaders before the General Assembly last year to take bold actions in climate change. And they did that, and they were rallying in many cities around the world. I myself was very honored to be with 5,000 young people in Paris before the climate change agreement was signed, where they came from around the world asking their leaders to take bold actions. So what young people can do, I always remind young people that they have the power to impact this course of how things are going now with the sustainability debate, but more in reversing climate change and putting the planet on a sustainable path. First, they have the power as consumers. As consumers, they can decide to consume in a way that is more sustainable. They have the power as voters. to vote for green options and make sure that we vote and we put people in offices who are going to do something about saving the planet. And as they have the power as innovators. See who's innovating today and who are the main innovators around the world are all young people below the age of 30. And they can do a lot in bringing about innovations and innovative products that are going to make this planet more sustainable. So as innovators, as voters, as consumers, but also as mobilizers and educating the mass and telling people and making sure that we mobilize a global movement that is going to put this planet in a path of sustainability. I always remind my fellow youth that we didn't inherit this planet from previous generation because there's a problem with the word inheritance there. We didn't inherit it because if you inherit something, you're free to do whatever you want with it. But the right term there that we are borrowing this planet from future generations, not inheriting it from previous generations. And I think when you borrow something, you better hand it over in a good shape, and that's our responsibility. And I am seeing this basically shift in paradigm among young people who are thinking now what's being a cool job in the future is no longer working in the petroleum industry. It's more about renewable energy, for example. And I'm sensing that among many young innovators. When you meet with young entrepreneurs, they all want to be on the right side of history.
Mm-hmm. And that is so true. And as you mentioned, we really, a lot of people think we have a moral obligation, no matter what religion you are, if you don't have a religion, it makes no difference in that respect. But the idea is that we really have an obligation, a moral obligation to leave the earth in better shape than we found it. We're borrowing it, as you mentioned. We're stewards, so to speak, and we have to leave it for the next generation and the next generation beyond that. Now, our viewers can go to your website, www.un.org/Youth Envoy, and get a lot more information about what we're talking about today. You were talking about young people, and it brings to mind a major problem, not just in developing countries, but many developed countries. You have burgeoning populations of young people, but there aren't enough jobs. We see that there's automation taking place, artificial intelligence is coming into play in this situation. There are not enough jobs for these young people. Even some of them are very well educated and can't get employment. What can be done in this particular area? First off, how big of a problem is youth unemployment? And secondly, what can be done to help alleviate that problem?
It's a big problem, Bill. We have a serious issue that we need to tackle when it comes to youth unemployment. We have currently an estimate of 73 million young people who are unemployed, close to 500 million who are underemployed. So they can do much better and they can contribute in a much bigger way to the economy and to their own self-development and to fulfill their true potentials. But they are not doing that right now because they are constrained with the limited opportunities offered to them. So this is a major issue. Looking ahead in the next 15 years in the lifespan of the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to create another 600 million jobs for young people just to keep with the current pace. And I think that's a major challenge. And we have been working with governments, with the private sector, asking more public-private partnerships and putting people at the center and creating jobs for young people at the center. We have been warning from a lost generation in some parts of the world where young people are graduating and waiting for years and years without finding a decent way of connecting with the job and labor market. And I think it's been a chronic problem now in some part of the world, creating jobs for young people. Let me remind you as well that moving forward and creating this number of jobs is not going to be only the job of governments or the private sector, but we keep talking about inventing jobs and supporting young entrepreneurs who can also contribute by creating jobs for themselves and to others. But when I travel around the world and I see what young people are facing when they want to start a new business, there's a serious problem with the ecosystem we offer to them. As in some places, you have a legal framework that is absolutely not conducive for businesses to grow, whether taxation from day one or bureaucracy in registering companies, and not really allowing young people to find it easy. If there are no jobs to be sought, at least let them invent their own jobs. But even there are many challenges. The issue of access to credit in a country I just recently visited, I was shocked to know that for a young person to get a loan, the interest rate is 30%. 30 for a young person. So it's becoming almost a mission impossible for some of these young entrepreneurs to access a credit. Let us say, of course, the issue of building their capacities so they could ensure that they don't do some of the easily avoidable mistakes and starting new businesses. We're seeing a high mortality rate among these businesses because there are not enough coaching. And when it comes also to scaling up some of these projects, they have the same problems, lows, funding, and also coaching. And it's a reminder that we have been sending in all directions. We cannot leave this generation left behind or at the sideline of development. That's why the United Nations and with the central role of the International Labour Organization adopted at the highest level with the CEB, the Chief Executive Board of the United Nations, a system-wide initiative, a global initiative for decent jobs for youth. This is the first UN system-wide initiative at the global level that dealing with decent jobs for youth. We are going to offer technical support to governments to design better youth policies, connect with the private sector and other stakeholders, and think how we are going to share what works in youth employment. Because what I keep finding in many countries, they keep telling us, tell us what works. Tell us how we can make our economy produces more jobs for young people. And we intend to do more of that. And I really hope this global initiative of decent jobs will be the UN contribution to do something about this big challenge that we face today, which is youth unemployment.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to the website, www.globalconnectionstelevision.com, to see some of our previous shows. Also, if you are a community access television, PBS station, a commercial station, you have any type of media outlet, you're a member of a service club, whatever it may be, and you're interested in these international topics, please feel free to download the programs and to show them. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help people better understand international issues and how they impact us regardless of where we live on the face of the earth. Today we're taking a look at the role of youth and what they can do to help combat climate change, to eliminate poverty, to empower women, not only tomorrow, but also what can they do today. My guest today is an expert on working with youth. My guest today is Mr. Ahmad Alhendawi. Ahmad Alhendawi of Jordan is the first ever United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. Ahmad, we're talking about youth, and it brings to mind, well, there are youth all around the world, but now you're from an area of the world that's seen considerable turmoil over the past several years, past several decades, really. And I'm just curious, as we look at some of these areas, we see there's peace in some parts, there are peaceful areas, but also you look at Syria where there's a civil war raging. Yeah. You look at a situation with maybe Boko Haram, with other terrorist groups in various parts of Africa. What can be done to help bring those youth in? They certainly are having problems, obviously, just surviving. But are you able to work with them to help bring them into the discussion and to help them sort of chart what they want their future to be?
Peace and security in general is a big challenge for young people. We estimate that 600 million youth globally, they live in conflict zones or security fragile situations where they are severely affected by these conflicts. And this is a massive number of young people. We keep reminding everyone that there's no peace without development, and there is no development without peace. And I would add to that, there is no peace nor development without really focusing on young people. Now, with this massive challenge that we face today with youth, peace and security, we have been calling for some time now that the world has to change the approach by prioritizing working with youth in these conflicts and find a way to break this chain of conflicts and vulnerability among young people by investing more in youth. That's why last year we have convened several events focusing counter-violent extremism, youth, peace and security, the contribution for young people in peace building, and that culminated last year by the adoption of a historic Security Council Resolution 2250 on youth, peace and security. That was the first ever Security Council resolution on youth, peace and security, offers 5 key elements for how we are going to engage youth as peace builders. And here I have to highlight that historically we have seen youth issues being only discussed in development frameworks, as education, employment, health, all of that. But then we realize that youth issues are not only development issues. Youth issues are also peace and security issues. And we have to find a better way as United Nations, and particularly in that regard, the Security Council, in acknowledging the role that young people could play in peace-building efforts. That's why the Security Council Resolution 2250, which is, I would say, a groundbreaking resolution when it comes to acknowledging the contributions of youth as peace builders, has to be implemented now. That resolution calls for working more at the prevention element, and I'm a big believer that we have to do more at the prevention of these conflicts. Young people are paying the highest price of these conflicts. That's why the second element talks about protection. We see the situation of young people, and you mentioned Syria, for example, where young people are paying the highest price today, dropping out of schools and losing prospects for their future, and leave them in much more vulnerable place to be recruited by militias and radical groups. And the third element, we have to tackle the issue of participation. When I look to many of these peace talks that come up, you will find young people are being thrown to death, basically, in fighting in these conflicts. But when it comes to negotiations, we don't see them around the negotiating table. And that's where the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, called for giving them a seat at the table. And the element of participation is very important. Now we are following the negotiations in Yemen and Syria and other places, and youth have to be brought to the table because they are an integral part of orchestrating the healing system in these countries. And the other element, the disengagement and reintegration. If you mention Shabab, for example, which as an Arab, it's something that upset me and makes me really angry when I hear the word Shabab refers to the radical groups in Somalia. The word Shabab in Arabic means youth. So this group, they hijacked the word Shabab. When I visited Somalia last year, I told them I'm here to show the world who are the real Shabab of the country, who are the real youth of the country. Not that terrorist organization that has hijacked the term Shabab, but rather to reclaim the word Shabab and show the world that the real Shabab of Somalia are the ones who are pro-peace, pro-development. So there, the issue of disengagement from these militias and radical groups and reintegration in the society is very important. Last but not least, is we need to build a strong partnership at the international level to put young people at the center of peace-building efforts, not to have them as afterthought in peace negotiations and peace talks, but rather as a central piece if we are serious about making sure that we do something about these ongoing conflicts and get young people and orchestrating the healing of these conflicts. And I remain very concerned with what's happening in the region and other parts of the world where young people, as I said, paying the highest price, and I see no way out of this turmoil without investing more in young people and getting them as equal partners in peace and security, and invest more in their development needs.
It's absolutely critical that take place. That's very interesting about Al-Shabaab. I was not aware of that. But normally when you have a radical group, they take on some militaristic name or maybe even a religious name or something like that. But to take on the name youth is very unique. Well, we're just about out of time. Before we do, but you've been doing this over 3 years now. And as we go through any type of project, any type of program, there's a learning curve. We all pick up new information. What have been some of the best practices that, very briefly, that you've focused upon, and what are some of the lessons that have been learned as you look back on the past 3 years?
Looking back, I think the biggest achievement and the biggest lesson is I realized that we have to fix the narrative. I realized that we have to fix the way the world understands young people. More and more I see many politicians and many governments struggle to understand their youth. They always ask what youth want and how to interact with this generation. Some blame them to be careless or hopeless, or they don't care about public issues. So we have to fix that narrative. That's why I think one of the greatest achievements that we have made at the United Nations in the past 3 years is fixing that narratives by ensuring that youth as peace builders, the peace and security agenda, equal partners in development, and offer more mechanisms. We have witnessed a dramatic increase, basically, and considerable amount of mechanism funding programs across the UN system. My hope is that this will continue in the future, and that we'll see not only fixing the narrative, but also fixing the situation on the ground, because we had to fight that battle first, and now I hope this will trickle down to make sure that people on the ground understand that youth are not the future. Youth are today half of the world's population, and life expectancy in close to 18 countries is up to 45 years old. So but they will not be here in the future if we keep dealing with them with that sense of postponing and not dealing with them in a sense of urgency. So I really hope that this new narrative that we champion at the United Nations will find good ears around the world, and the governments and civil society groups will interact with this in a positive way.
And lessons learned ties right into the biggest challenge you face, the hardest question in the last 30 seconds we have. What is the biggest challenge you face as far as involving more UN agencies, more governments, more of the private sector, CEOs from various corporations, the non-governmental organizations, civil society? What is the challenge to get them involved and focused on this problem and to help bring the youth in under the tent and to work with them?
Truly, there are many tents when it comes to youth issues, because they are the tent of youth employment, and there are many actors around that, and there are one for peace and security. There are different actors, one related to education and health issues. So it required a lot of efforts in making sure that in all these different forums and in all these different places, we bring the relevant actors and try to get them to understand youth in a better way, understand youth needs, and the centrality of working with youth issues to achieve all these development goals, from gender equality to education for all, and combating radicalism and elevating extreme poverty and all of that. I think we have to convert more actors and bring them to the table, and we have to keep showcasing the role of young people in all these fields. One of the biggest challenges has been that some they still think about young people as they are passionate but not professional. They are not good enough to contribute. But I think we are challenged in many sectors.
Exactly. Ahmad Alhendawi, it is an extremely important topic, and I'm so delighted you were here today. And I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting, very informative program.
Always a pleasure, Bill.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.